before you open a business, make sure that what you want to do is be running a business that's successful, right? Because I think you get into this realm of like, you really want to have a thing that when you succeed, you're not like, oh man, I really liked it the other way, or I really preferred it when I worked for somebody else. So, I think if I were going to give like prospective store owners advice, because I think like that's the person that I hear from the most that's kind of in this camp, like try to build for the life that you're hoping to have when your business is successful. Nobody opens a store and thinks it's going to make no money. Nobody opens a store and expects it to fail. That's not like the dream you're living. So like if it succeeds, what does that do?
I was looking, Matt, on your Facebook page, and the first thing that stood out to me about your store, and we'll get into how, the store came to be, why you got into the industry, but how big the gaming space is. Was that by design from the get-go?
Yeah, I think, when we started off, I had run a chain of stores in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. And so we had stores that were like, I think the smallest was like 900 square feet and the largest like 4,500 square feet at the time. And this is like 2010, right? So it was pretty tough to find a game store anywhere that was much more than 8,000 square feet at the time. And that was sort of like your outliers, your granddaddy stores, right? So when we opened, we were fairly small and we kind of did it as like strict retail. And then there was just so much demand for like community space, place to meet, place to hang out, especially miniatures games, which are very space intensive. So after 3 years, we said, it's pretty clear that this isn't going away. Let's expand. Let's really give ourselves the room to let people hang out. And so we did that. And we've used it a lot as like a classroom space. So we do a lot of kind of like hobby days and teach you different Dungeons and Dragons skills and learn to play Magic or learn to play Pokemon. But obviously we also do like your weekly tournaments, your weekly miniatures hangout, that kind of thing. So I wouldn't say from the beginning, but I think it was more an adaptation to just the community needs in Penfield.
And even having on the wall there, I saw in the picture the rentals for the board games, which I thought was quite unique. I've seen a couple of stores do that. How often is that getting used? I would imagine quite a bit if it's something that could, be rented like to try out.
Yeah, so the way we do it's maybe a little bit different. There's a few places that it's like baked into their sort of like profit model, if you will, for their board games. For us, we sort of have like an ecosystem of like demos, right? So we do a lot of offsite kind of what I would call like customer acquisition kinds of events, right? Where we go out into the community and we try to show people who've maybe never really seen a board game, or their version of getting a demo before was like, I tried to watch the YouTube video and it was kind of boring and long and I gave up. So we open a lot of board games to go through that. And sort of part of the life cycle is, we do the in-store demo thing too. But when we get done with that, we have copies of these games that, we could sell used games. That would be one outlet. A lot of stores do that. We could donate them to, community organizations or charities or what have you. But what we found over time is what works is we give them about a year or two in our rental library. And the rental library is very, very simple. The way we do it, you rent the game. It's a sticker on the back that says that you can rent this for $10 or whatever the price is. It's usually about 20% of the MSRP of the game or the retail price, wherever we have it at. And you rent it. If you return it on time, you get the full amount of store credit. If you don't return it on time, you don't get anything back as store credit. And so the idea is just to kind of get you to do that at-home extended demo. We don't make anything on that until you buy a game, but obviously you also have great confidence in the game that you're purchasing because you've probably already played it at home and your friends and family will play it with you. And there's not this like chance you buy a $75 board game and play it once. There's a retail logic to like why you would want people to do that, but we found that it gets a lot of brand loyalty and it gets a lot of people who are maybe more reluctant purchasers to say yes to a game because they kind of have more confidence in it than we can give them in a 5-minute in-store demo or at, a community center game night or something like that.
Sure. Yeah. And are you running the game store by yourself? Do you have a business partner?
So it's my store. My wife also works in the store. She used to work for Veterans Affairs, and she eventually, sort of like this is one of those unbelievable things about the game trade, right? Like transitioned to data management for a game store instead of the federal government, which is one of those things that's like wild how complicated the game trade is. That's like a skill set that was relevant. But it's worked super well. So, in that sense, like the person who is my partner in life also works in the store, and we work really well together. But we also have a staff of, I think, 6 people at the moment other than us. So a lot of the work that I do is behind the scenes or in offsite kind of marketing stuff. And then our team at the store is very, very good in terms of doing the sales and event running kind of stuff. Right now, we have a community manager named Mikey, who's just really awesome, especially with the like Pokemon and Learn to Play kind of events, and a bunch of other people.
That's fantastic. So that's great that you get to work with your wife too. Now, if we go back a little to the beginning for when the store came to be, Just Games Rochester, did you always think that you would run a game store someday? Was that, in your mind as a kid, growing up, like you loved games and you eventually could envision yourself doing it? Or was it something that kind of manifested unexpectedly?
Well, I've definitely always been a gamer. I think you're going to hear that from probably a ton of people who work in the game trade. I mean, just like conversation over drinks, I hear it from a ton of people who work in the game trade, right? It's something that a lot of us come in because we go, oh, I kind of know the product, or I know the community, or I know CCGs or D&D or something like that. And so that's kind of like the passion. The passion has to come from somewhere. And I've played games, since I was a kid. I played with my brothers. I played with a group in high school. All kinds of things, Dungeons and Dragons, Magic. I had a brief stint with Warhammer Fantasy when I was a kid. The models were very expensive for a 12-year-old. It didn't last. Which they still are. I had all of that, but I really didn't, this wasn't like a career path. My background is in teaching and journalism. So I worked for a couple different newspapers, and I worked as a adjunct English professor at a few different universities. And, I enjoyed that teaching. I actually taught a little bit in Rochester, doing kind of like a writing for games kind of class here and there as universities need someone to fill that in. And, I still enjoy that, but I started moonlighting for a game store. This was when we were in Wisconsin still, like 4 hours on a Friday, right? And this is where it becomes very typical. I was hired for 4 hours, and then I was like there for 30. And at some point, James Matthew, who was the owner of those stores, said, hey, you're here all the time and I'm thinking about expanding. Like, do you want to partner with me on that and kind of like do the legwork? Because I don't want to, but I see the potential. And so the rest is kind of like history, right? Like I was working an adjunct job and I was like, yeah, sure, I can do both. And that just didn't last. I eventually just ended up doing the game store full time. That was more enjoyable.
I bet. Are you originally from Wisconsin?
No, I'm originally from south of Buffalo, so a little town called Casadaga, which is in Chautauqua County, which if you don't know where that is, that's okay. No one does. It's off the Fredonia exit on Route 90. So south of Buffalo, and then my wife is from Fairport, so quite close to where we are now in Rochester.
Excellent.
We moved back to be near family, and the game store thing fell into place because there was, market opening. I think if we had come back here and been like, oh, there's 75 game stores, and we would have done something else, right? It's just, It's not wise to open when the market is saturated, but we were lucky. We had a skill set, and Rochester was not a saturated market.
How is the gaming community where you are in terms of, new customers versus old customers coming in, like, returning, I should say?
Yeah, I mean, so we've always kind of taken the tactic that like old customers, right? Like you want some method of retaining customers, but for us, we're always trying to engage new customers deliberately. I try not to leave that to luck, right? So I think we do a pretty good job of that. I think, in a year over year, we're probably bringing in, I don't know, a couple hundred new customer conversions a month. So that, not every single one of those people who comes in and buys a game is going to become like a regular shopper with you. But if they shop for the holidays, or they come in when they have a birthday or what have you, that does kind of the job of building a larger community. And I've always kind of said, like, you can almost, play is something that everybody does, right? Like everybody plays, kids play, adults play, people play games, people watch ball games, everybody does it. Your form might be different, but you almost have no upper acquisition limit except the population limit in your area, right? So I've always said you can open a store and create your own opportunity by finding that group of people that wasn't previously your gamers and kind of like converting them to how much fun this is, right? So I think as long as people go into it with that, I mean, that's been our attitude. I think you can kind of just keep opening stores as long as you're creating new customers and not sort of like my goal is to like get all my competition's customers or something like that. Never really works.
Right. No, it's so true. And we were talking about it offline before we started recording about how each of the stores, including yourself, you all have a different story to tell. And I think it's what makes this industry so interesting. I mean, at least from my vantage point of hearing all the stories from you guys. And I'm sure from your end too, from all your interactions like with other game store owners, does the same like shock and awe that I get from it, like the thrill that it gives me to hear all these different stories, is it the same from your end as well?
Yeah, I think one of the appealing things, and maybe this is just how my brain works, right? But one of the appealing things for me about small business ownership in general, but the game industry in specific, is that it moves quickly, and it's everybody's got a little bit of different story and a different tactic, and you do a lot of adaptation, and the skill set that you maybe learned in 2024 is not the one that you're going to need in 2025. I think the closest thing, I've talked to some friends who are in tech, and they sort of talk about like learning coding is like, you don't really learn a coding language and you're done. You learn the skill set of acquiring coding languages as a skill set. So I kind of feel like the game trade kind of has that similar appeal. Like, oh, you knew how to run a Magic tournament, so this new Star Wars Unlimited game came along, and it's kind of different from Magic, but now you're going to kind of teach your team the basics. Or if you're, sole proprietor or owner operator, you're going to learn the basics, and then you know how to run a great event, so you're just going to translate that to the new rules of the new game. So there's some things that are transferable, but you're always kind of working and thinking on your feet and kind of, creating on the last thing and learning the new thing. And I think that's exciting. And I think a lot of people, when, like if you go to GAMA or you go to a distributor trade show or something like that, one of the great things about those shows is that you get to hear what are the problems being solved by other people right now in real time. And I don't know of a lot of, even like when I was in academics, right, there's a little bit of like publish or perish competition. So like the really cutting edge research is not what's getting shared necessarily at a conference. The published stuff is, but the stuff they're working on isn't. And I love that in this trade, you can go to a show and hear like, yeah, here are the 6 things I tried to solve this problem that didn't work. And here's the one right now that is working. And here's what I would suggest if you want to try it, from somebody who's just, they're not in competition with you. They just want to see you succeed and see your customers kind of like get some benefit out of their experience. So there's a more collaborative atmosphere, I think, in general, than I've seen in a lot of places, a lot of trades.
Yeah, and I know it's different from store to store, but from what you see, whether it be going to something like GAMA, talking to other store owners, and just like from your own standpoint, like what do you feel is the biggest difficulty with running the store on a day-to-day basis?
There's always a little bit of juggling, right? I think the biggest difficulty at this point is just kind of making sure, we have a team that works the sales floor, and we have a team that does inventory, and we have obviously customers that we're interacting with on a daily basis, and just sort of making sure that you have the product arriving in the amount that you need for the customers who are there, and you're explaining well the value that you are trying to propose for that product to people. There's a lot of juggling in terms of training. We spend a lot of time working with staff or getting staff feedback or getting customer feedback and trying to sort of build a better mousetrap. And I think a lot of the way I've described it is like a lot of what our store does well is like if you look at a D&D character, and there was a guy at GAMA who did, Saints Dave, who did a presentation on like what character class is your store years ago. And it was kind of like one of those things where it like clicked for, and it's like, oh, right, our store is like one of the dexterity characters, right? Like we do a lot of nimble, like think on your feet kinds of adjustments, and a lot of retraining and a lot of that kind of thing. And that kind of juggling is like, it's where I excel, but it's also extremely difficult. It's really hard to stay on top of that. And sometimes I'm like, yeah, I wish I had like, I don't know, like 30 more years of inventory and customer base to work with, because it would just make the job different. But at the same time, I probably wouldn't be as good at that. It's not what I know how to do.
What are your roles on a day-to-day basis with the store? Because I know you have a little bit, you have a team around you as well.
Yeah, so on a day-to-day basis, I do a lot of the sort of marketing copy and the ad design. So when we do a lot of charity fundraiser kind of partnerships with schools, and like the zoo, and the Seneca Park Zoo will be one of our upcoming events. And so sort of coordinating like how those things are going to market a product and how those things are going to tie into a customer experience, and, meeting with folks. We work with museums a lot too. So a lot of our offsite events last year, for example, we worked with the Strong Museum of Play. There's a lot to be done in terms of making sure that all of those events are communicated well. So a lot of that kind of, there isn't a roadmap stuff is what I do. I also do a lot of the sort of inventory management stuff. The actual kind of spreadsheet and turn rate calculations are mostly done at this point by Josie. That's my inventory manager, also my wife, who is amazing at it. And if I'm being really honest, she started doing that a few years ago. And, you know, whenever you hand over the reins of something, you're like double checking. And she's one of the people that I have had to just go like, yeah, you're doing it better than I do it. So just do what you're doing. Which is great. I love it when you get someone into a role and it's a fit and they're just crushing it in a way that you were like, man, I was working really hard to get half the results.
You hit on something too I wanted to touch on. I've discussed this before, but I always like hearing everybody's different takes on it. And that's when you are, you know, have people that work for you, even if it wasn't your spouse, but it's just, you know, an employee that you're not related to, is giving up like control, I guess you could say, or trusting the other person. How do you start to balance that? How do you get comfortable with doing that? I know it's not natural for everyone. Some people, like, they are very easy, you know, to delegate and it's fine with them. How do you, from your standpoint, build a employee base of people that you could trust? Like, what are some things you look for to then make it easier for you to be like, okay, I know you could do that, just like you mentioned with your wife?
Yeah. So, I mean, for us, it starts with the hiring process. And this is something I would encourage every business owner that I've ever talked to and have to like look at closely what you're doing when you start putting out even just your job postings, right? Obviously, there are things that you do because they're baseline, like legal requirements, or they just make sense. Like you want to describe what you're looking for. But we also try to have a process that focuses on skills and focuses on what kinds of experience the person has. So, you know, we have like a 3-manager team, and one of the things that we'll do is I'll go through resumes and sort of weed through based on, did they kind of like meet the criteria? Did they like read the instructions? And then I'll remove names from that and pass that on to another person on the team. Maybe that's Josie, maybe it's Mikey, whoever's in the community management role. And we don't always do the full process, but we want to do enough of it to have like multiple layers of like just weed out skills, like try to remove anything that's like a bias on the part of the reader and say like, okay, well, what are these people's skills? What experience do they bring to the table? And then bring them into the interview and talk through a series of questions. And we've written questions that are very specific to the kind of store we're trying to build. So we ask a lot of sort of like cultural and behavioral sorts of questions about like, oh, if you were in a store and this happened, what would your response be, to kind of get a sense of how, where their instincts are. And then even from that point on, I think it's so important to meet with people one-on-one and kind of check in with them and kind of see like, hey, we gave you this task last week and it seemed like you did a super good job. Was it like, did you enjoy working on that? Or was it like a huge pain? And when they respond to something like with excitement, oh yeah, that was great. And I really thought this was like super easy and I would change this about it. It's like, okay, maybe I should be giving this person more of that responsibility because they clearly were great at it and liked doing it. So some of it is just making sure you have that communication and you're being really deliberate in terms of finding the things that people excel at. Because, you know, I've said this for years, like the game trade everyone I know is doing everything they can based on the size of their business and the income of their business to try to make the job as palatable as possible. It's a great community of people, but it is ultimately retail, right? So like none of us are making $200,000 a year working in this trade. So I think having that communication and making it a priority to get your team tasks that they are good at and enjoy is something that you can do that makes the job feel really satisfying. And, you know, obviously at the end of the day, the job's the job. It is retail. You are selling things. There's nothing you can do about that. But I see a lot of people without a real process in place. And I think once you kind of sit down and talk with folks and go like, well, let's talk about what you should have. I think it really helps like dial in how you can build a team around what the needs of your particular store are. And it's usually not plug and play. Like I had a lot of experience that was from academics or working on a farm, right? And those things, you know, there's some good leadership and team building skills there, but most of the actual things don't apply that you would do in like on a grape farm to a retail store that sells games.
So was working on a grape farm, was that like the first job that you had before the game store? Like how I'm actually very interested to hear more about that. Like essentially your upbringing, like things that you did that eventually got you into the game store side of things.
my family background, it's mostly farmers for a couple of generations, and that basically means small business owner, right? Like, and to some extent, like equally unprofitable as a game store at times, right? Because farmers are very much beholden to like weather and demand, right? Like if you get a good growing year, sometimes everyone did, and then your product's not worth as much. So there's a certain amount of that flexibility that goes in there. And so I think just seeing those skills, whether it's bookkeeping or whether it's working with a team of, we often had a couple of people that were full-time at any given farm that you might work for. And then there were people like me when I was a teenager that were, we were there for like the picking season or something, or the maintenance season or the cleanup season. And then that crew would move on and I would, I don't know, go back to college or whatever, depending on what it was. So I did a fair amount of those jobs, and a lot of my uncles and a lot of my aunts were involved in farm management for a long time. So yeah, that certainly was an influence. It's also a very like everybody works until the job is done, whatever the skill is kind of environment. And I think that instills a kind of work ethic that's always useful with a small business owner, right? Like sometimes you just have to get in there and do the 90-hour work week.
It certainly seems like there are parallels between working on a farm and the game store. I mean, people know that retail typically is, especially like for somebody in your position, it's a lot of hours, especially when, you're the one running the show. What like skills and what insights do you think, and obviously it's not going to be 100% one-to-one, but what are some things you think from the days of being on the farm and learning those skills, which of those do you think helped you with the game store the most?
This is going to sound goofy, but I think self-discipline is something that you really have to learn when you're outdoors a lot, right? Like you can't be kind of sloppy with your body, with your person. You can't hurt yourself and then go back to work. And so, especially when you're on a family farm, a lot of times, you might be the owner, or you might be the owner's kid or the owner's nephew or whatever. That was frequently the case for me anyway. And so I think, you kind of don't want to let the team down. So you kind of want to be careful with yourself and careful with your energy, but also kind of work as much as you can. And I think that kind of skill set translates super well in terms of being like, one thing I've talked to friends about that they struggle with when they open a business is that they start making money and they're like, okay, great. I'm profitable now. And like leaving that money alone to reinvest in the business, or learning what you think your expenses are going to be and being disciplined about how you portion that out. That's really difficult, right? Like it's a skill you have to learn either by trial and error or by someone kind of guiding you. And I think that can be a really difficult thing. And I think just growing up around small business owners, you can kind of see like when the guesses go wrong, it becomes more difficult. There's a piece of equipment that goes longer on the farm without being repaired, or you have to do it yourself. And that's more hours and more time. So I just think getting that kind of like self-discipline early was super helpful. It kind of set me up for success in small business ownership, but that doesn't take away from the fact that like, man, it's just a heck of a lot of work and it's not for everybody to do this kind of thing, right? You got to be a certain kind of crazy to want to like take the wheel in your hands,
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, a game store owner, I mean, being in retail in general, I mean, it's clearly a lot of work. And, we talked a little bit again offline. We were talking about, it being a labor of love at the end of the day, because in many cases, it's not a career you're going to get rich on, but it's something that you're very passionate about doing. And clearly from your background of self-discipline and working hard, it's clearly something you're doing. Can you talk a little bit about what is it that keeps yourself and what you have perceived from, your conversations with other store owners that keeps you doing this, knowing that it's, essentially a labor of love, the margins are low? Like what is the continuing factor that essentially keeps you coming back?
Yeah. So, I mean, for me, I've kind of known for a while, since before we opened this store in Rochester, that a lot of it for me was being able to be consistently involved in what was important to the when I say community, I don't mean it nebulously. I mean the town you live in, the people who are around you, the people who live in your city, the schools, the libraries, whatever. So we've built a business marketing structure that allows us to put an awful lot of money back into community organizations. So, like our community support page, I think right now there's, I don't know, maybe 30 or 40 organizations listed there. Those are just the ones from the last couple of years. We're probably well over 100 community partners we've worked with. And for me, what keeps me excited is being able to go to those new organizations or have a customer. This is really where I get engaged. Have a customer come to us and go, this is what really matters to us. This organization was really important to me. It was really important to somebody I care about. it's really important to my kids, whatever, or just pitching it, right? Like, this is an organization that matters, and we would love to see you kind of like use your store to raise awareness or whatever their need is. So, that excitement for me comes from that continual growing community engagement, the not stagnation, the let's go talk about the thing that's important now. Like, a great example is a few years ago, we had a customer, Dean, who had been running a birthday sort of charity fundraiser. And I believe he was running it for the Trevor Project, and he'd kind of been running it in like his church basement for a little while. And he kind of said, like, I'd love to make this a little bigger. And I think at the time it was like 32 players or something. And I said, yeah, that's great. That's a really cool cause. You have a great group of people working around it. Let's see what we can do. And so we kind of worked together for a couple of years. And last year that event had 430 people attended. We had like an offsite rental for it, and it raised like $52,000. So there's an element where being engaged in that kind of stuff makes me really excited to go to work. And obviously there's an element of like, yeah, you're also sort of like doing something good in the world, which I think keeps a lot of people engaged. And I think you kind of come to that. Some people are excited by like making the business bigger. That's their thing, right? That's cool too. But for me, it's like, what's important to the people who are around me, and then how can I help them achieve that? And I think the store is kind of a vehicle for me to live that life.
Do you think both directly and indirectly you've seen that translate into, whether it be new customers coming into the store or cultivating those existing customers? Do you think your involvement from your community outreach work has been a good, like, I guess, marketing tool, you could say, as well, like maybe as a byproduct?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think, how do I put this without it sounding like super mercenary, right? Because I think the thing is, anything that you do with a business, you have to be able to justify it somehow. You can't just do it because you love it, right? This gets into the, if I loved Magic, would I open all the booster packs in my store question? Like, yeah, I've seen this happen. It's probably not a good business decision, right? So yeah, I think for us to do it on an ongoing basis, there has to be a marketing benefit. And again, for me, I can say like we focus a lot on new customer acquisition, trying to get games in front of people and go, look, they have a real benefit, right? And so part of this ties together for me. If there's an organization that matters to you and you've never heard of Catan, and we run a Catan charity fundraiser, you're going to go, what the heck's a Catan, and how do I learn more about it? Because it just did this cool thing. So a lot of it for me is kind of that strategy of like, I kind of know that these organizations are doing good work, and I know games have a value. And so the marketing value is like demonstrating it, right? Instead of just telling you about it, I'm going to show you why it's cool. So yeah, I think that's definitely a powerful marketing device. But it's kind of one of those things that's like earned advertising, right? Like it happens organically. And I really like that about it. I don't feel like I'm going out and buying an advertisement on television and telling you have to buy in the next 2 weeks because there's a sale on. That kind of high pressure stuff just doesn't appeal to me. And I think there's a certain group of customers that kind of hate it and don't want it either. And so that's kind of the group that we're trying to work with and trying to serve.
And it seems like the organic reach essentially is what a lot of game stores seem to go for, like the word of mouth aspect in terms of getting people to the store. Is there anything that you would want to highlight that's, it could be something social media related. I know that's very common for people using for marketing. I didn't know if there was anything else, from a unique standpoint that you felt that was helping, get the store name out there essentially.
Yeah. I mean, I could say all kinds of stuff about like pay for your Facebook ads and pay for your Google ads. And I don't know, TikTok might be going away as of 3 hours ago, but figure out how TikTok works or whatever the next thing is, right? I think those are all important. But I think when you're talking about like word of mouth, I think people tend to say that, like, I always heard it said anyway. And when people would say it to me, what I heard was like passivity, right? Well, word of mouth is very good for us. If I'm going to depend on that, I want to give you something to talk about every month, at least, right? Here's something new I want you to go say. Like, I loved it. I hated it. I want you to have an opinion on what I'm doing, not just, they had the new Lorcana release and it was great, right? Like I want you to go beyond that. Like, oh, they did this cool event where we donated D&D books to the library and we got star credit for every book we donated, or we don't, whatever it is. We've done a bunch of things like that where you get an experience and you get a feel good and we get some marketing and we get some sales, and those all go together. And so those are the things that I'm looking at when I go for that sort of like earned advertising potential out of like one of these community pairings, right? And one of the things that I love about it is that it enables me to, like, when an organization comes to us and like, oh, well, what fee do you charge for this? And I'm like, nothing, because I'm getting advertising, right? Like, I don't have to charge you, right? It works super well because often nonprofits are the places that really struggle with their budgets and really struggle to also get the word out about their mission. So it's like really mutually beneficial to do that. And obviously, this is not a fit for everybody. You can't really do this if you don't want to. Like, and you kind of can't fake interest in an organization. You know, if there's something that someone brings to you and it's just really not a fit, yeah, you got to be able to say no. I can't think of an example where that happened, but you got to kind of mean it, right? Like, people are, the BS detector is really tuned in the world right now. And I think people are really alert for that. And so I wouldn't encourage someone to go like roll the dice on it if they didn't have organizations that mattered to either a customer, right, or to them personally.
We're going to take a quick break from this podcast to talk about our sponsor, Cardboard Shuffle. Cardboard Shuffle was our 10th podcast interview here at the Match Slip with store owner Mark. Mark has expanded his brand and has produced his own card sleeves called Shuffle Shields. Shuffle Shields come in packs of 100 premium matte card sleeves for standard size trading cards. They contain no PVC and are acid free. I have 17 packs of Shuffle Shields card sleeves to give away to listeners of the podcast and followers of the Match Slip on social media. Requests for a free pack of card sleeves shipped for free to you will be processed on a first-come, first-served basis. To receive your free pack of Shuffle Shields, you'll need to send a screenshot that you're following Cardboard Shuffle on Facebook to frank@thematchslip.com.
You know, as I was listening to what you said, it was making me think of, like, from a marketing standpoint, it was making me think like the way you operate is very much in a way like a storyteller. Like you mentioned, you wouldn't want to just, you know, tell somebody, okay, post on Facebook, use the ads there, do that to get the name out. You were talking, you even mentioned it too, of, you know, instead of just saying I did X or I like magic, the elaboration on it to tell that story, I think, is a unique perspective that you're bringing, because people at the end of the day do really enjoy stories. And I think that's what could tie them to a brand like your store. I was curious if you kind of felt that way about how you operate yourself, if you felt like you enjoy the storyteller aspect.
Yeah, I definitely think it's something that we do a lot of on the sales floor, right? I think that's maybe some of the, like, the training element of things too, and the hiring element of things too. But, like, I mean, you caught me, right? Like, my master's is in creative writing. Like, my background is, yes, I do love storytelling. Yes, that is the place where if someone's like, hey, do you use your degree? I'm like, not really. But yeah, I mean, at a core, I use the impulse that led me down the path to get that kind of education, right? So yeah, I love that narrative. I love being able to, you know, tell somebody else's story, if that makes sense too. Like, give them the platform to, like, get out there and talk about something that matters. Like, we had a couple events. Like, a few years ago, we did an event where we had like a wildlife rehab place come in, and they brought like their American kestrel with them and told their little birds like harrowing survival story. And it was like a super cool fundraiser. And I think that might've been around the launch of Wingspan or something. I don't even remember quite how we tied it to being like a game event, but we did. But what was fun about that was like, hey, we had a wild animal in the store. Wasn't that neat? You know? And so I'm always interested in finding ways to, like, tie a narrative or a story or something interesting from a group or a person into what we're selling in the store. Because I think if you're just selling another widget, like, man, I'm not inspired by that. I don't really want to shop at a place that's like just selling me the thing. I can get the thing so many ways now. You've got to have something that sets you apart from that. Having the stuff is not the hard part. I mean, it is. It's a hard part, but it's achievable.
So how would you go about, like, say somebody wants to learn a new game, you know, instead of just taking the game off the shelf and putting it down and just talking at it to them, how would you go about it from a storyteller standpoint? I'm curious what you're like, especially since you have a background with teaching too. I'm curious what your approach would be to that.
Yeah, I mean, so my approach personally, I always want to tie to, so if I know the game and it's not a demo, you know, I will always tie it to what my experience with the game is, right? I want people to understand that if I've played the thing, this is what I thought was cool about it. This is what was fun. This is what my friend who played it liked. And a lot of times in you know, selling a game, I'm trying to emphasize what's good about the game for the person who's asking. So usually I'll lead those conversations off by asking questions like, oh, do you have like a group of, if I'm looking at the game and I'm like, that's going to take 6 people, I'll be like, oh, do you have a 6 or more person group that you're trying to find a game for? Just so I know, do they realize that they're going to need, 3 couples or all their kids to like this thing? And, if it turns out that that's it, then I'll try to match the sort of like, oh, okay, well, I'm going to emphasize the part of my experience where like, oh, yeah, this was great when I had, my 3 friends and their spouses were over, 3 or 4 weeks ago and we played this and here's how it went. So I absolutely lean into that myself as a salesperson, but I think it's something that we also train our salespeople to do, right? It's not a question of like making up a lie. It's a question of matching the experience that you've actually had with the product the customer's asking about. And obviously that means we do a lot of like giving people games at staff meetings and telling them to go play with the new toys. And if you don't know the game, it's fine to be like, yeah, I really haven't played that one, but here's what I know about it. Or here are some things that are similar that I can tell you about, because a lot of times if someone's already got their heart set on a title, like they're just going to buy it. They're not going to talk to you. Usually when you're talking to them, they're going to kind of reveal to you in conversation, like, here's the need I'm trying to fill. I've got 12 friends coming over and none of my games match. And I don't want a party game because they're all Euro gamers. And I need something with some crunch to it that can accommodate all of us at once. Right. So you get into that kind of conversation and then you can go, oh, yeah, okay, I haven't played this, but, Chris over here, who's at our front of house, played it a few weeks ago. And here's a story that I'll relate badly to you. And then like, we can ask him about it if that sounds like something that you're into. So, I think sales is really storytelling in that sense anyway. Mm-hmm. So I think it's really smart to like point at those things. 'Cause I think the best places I've ever been when I go to like, and I do a lot of like, we have staff exercises, but I also do a lot of myself, like shopping other brands and getting a sense of how they do this, because you often get into this like silo, right? Like I'm selling Magic, so I'm going to sell it this way. And it's like, yeah, but like, how do luxury brands in the mall sell you soap, right? Like, I don't need luxury soap ever. Like, they sell it in the grocery store for like $5 for a pack of bars of soap. I don't ever need to go to that place, right? So, but there seem like there's always one there. So what are they doing that's great? And, there's all kinds of things we can learn about that. One of the best experiences I've ever had is like, I went into a place to buy a gift. And I'm going to space on the name of the brand, of course, because it's in my notes somewhere. But I went in there and I was like, oh, I think my sister-in-law shops in this store. And they're like, oh, what's her name? And I told them and they were like, oh, yeah, she lives on here and she works at this place and she bought these 3 things. And I was like, holy crap. Like, and I'm sure they were reading a computer, right? But like the skills were there and the training was there and the knowledge was there. And so that ability to kind of like guide and remember and build,
caught your attention.
Yeah, build me into the story that was already going on is really cool. So yeah, I'm always looking at what other places are doing to kind of build a narrative too, because honestly, like we have a lot in common with luxury soap. Nobody needs a board game.
I love that. There's the title right there. That's perfect. That's perfect.
It's really great to have games in your life, but the specific like survival needs are probably not going to be met by them. So we get to do the fun stuff. We get to do the storytelling stuff.
I think it's a brilliant way to look at it too, because in a way you're selling without selling, almost like indirect selling in a way. The story ties you to the brand, ties you to the product. You create an emotional attachment to it, and that kind of makes the sale without you having to do, hey, do you want to buy this from me? That type of ordeal.
Yeah, it's kind of it's a soft sales technique, right? And we talk about that somewhat in our sales training. And there's a few people who've written like super articulately about that. There's a slightly older book called Why We Buy that also talks about like how you lay out your store. That's really, really useful. Was really useful to me in terms of thinking about, do I really want to create pressure sales spaces in my store? I don't. That's not the experience I want. I don't want a high anxiety sales environment. That would drive me crazy. And I think it will drive a lot of customers crazy too. And I kind of want those customers.
Could you talk a little bit about the layout of the store? Like somebody walks in for the first time, how you have it structured?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that we do that's maybe a little bit different is the first, 25 feet of our store, like the counter's on the left. There's not a whole lot of product display there. We have some Magic singles in there. If you know what you're looking for, you're going to see them. But most of our CCG inventory is electronic at this point. They're kind of just like, a display piece. Our lounge is up front, so we have kind of a like parent or non-gamer space that's just kind of like comfortable. It's got some pillows in it. It's got some couches. It's got a nice little wooden table. There's a fireplace in it. it's electric. We don't keep it lit. It's there for aesthetic, right? Our insurance company would kill me if I said on a video that I was lighting a fireplace in there. We don't. Probably my landlord too. But it looks pretty, and we put a little light in it during, like the holidays, or we theme it that way. And so it's very, it's supposed to be sort of a relaxing space. And the first thing that we have in terms of product is a new release shelf and puzzles, right? So it's very recognizable if you don't know what we're selling. Like, I know what a jigsaw puzzle is, and I know what a new release is. And so I don't kind of have to have like a pressure sales at any point. And then the store is kind of divided into soft categories after that. So D&D is extremely popular and recognizable right now. That's immediately on your left when you walk in, and on the right are family games and toys. And then it kind of proceeds in sort of like getting more complicated as you get deeper into the store.
What would you say your favorite game is at this moment?
Wow, that's really, really, really tough.
You like a lot of them, I'm guessing.
Yeah, I always answer Dungeons and Dragons to this question, and I think it's because it's not edition specific with me, right? Like, I have played so many iterations and homebrews of that game over the years, and I've made so many good like social groups over the years, and such a diverse group of people too. Like, in terms of, like, I've played with people who work on like night road crews who've read like every D&D book and know like everything by heart, and I've played with people who are like, college students who've never played a role-playing game before and are just super excited to like play pretend with rules. And I've played with like kids at children's museums. And I think the experience of like playing pretend is so universal. And the way that like everybody gets into this, no matter who they are or what their education or background is, it's just kind of a fun thing for me. Like, yeah, we can all kind of like do this thing together. And what do you like about it? Oh, you like that? Cool. Like, oh, you don't want to do that rule? Great. Let's get rid of it then. It's very flexible. It's very customizable. It lets you kind of meet people where they are. I kind of love it. I've played all kinds of things, right? I've played card tournaments, and I've played probably 700 of the games we have on the shelves in the store right now. But that one keeps coming up as a game that I go back to because I want to play it with kind of everybody, because I think it's such a great introduction, right? You play D&D and you like it. There's like 500 RPGs in my store alone, and probably 1,200 in the stores in Rochester that are unique titles. So like, oh, you're into like, I don't know, you played Thief the Dark Project in 1995 and you wished that you could play that again. Guess what? Blades in the Dark is on the shelf. You want to play like Ocean's 11, but you're pigeons. That's on my shelf too, right? Like, it's such a weird like renaissance in that category too, that I feel like once they get you to play D&D, you're going to see all this cool creativity that's out there.
Is that the most popular game in your store as well, or is it something else?
I think I'd be lying if I said D&D was the most popular game in this store. I think we do very, very well with role-playing games in general. I think we do something called Epic D&D, which is like our high class, like high gloss, like D&D experience. We use painted terrain. We use like, we get a lot of dungeon masters that are, I mean, if I'm being honest, they're teachers and theater people mostly. So we hire them to do this kind of like actor troupe of Dungeons and Dragons kind of thing. It's kind of a unique experience, and it's a lot of fun. So I think D&D is one of the things that we do the best. And I think it's one of the things that we are the most unique in terms of what we're offering. But gosh, I mean, if I looked at last year, just as an example, I'm sure some CCG or other would be the top. CCGs are really big again right now. So to some extent, like, I can love what I love, but I also have a business to run and people to pay. So
right. No, it's very true. You almost have to, it's like a balancing act. Like you have to essentially, if you want those bills to be paid, you have to sell the product that is going to move the money.
And I got to tell you, like, not for nothing, like, there's a reason there's a CCG renaissance. Like, games like Magic and Pokemon, they're kind of, you could say, like, oh, well, they're the old ones and they make mistakes. And I'm like, yeah, but man, they've been around for 3 decades plus and they're doing something right. And at the same time, to compete with them, to be like the Lorcana or the Digimon or the One Piece, right? Like, you got to be doing something really right, because these are behemoths you're up against. So to move that needle the way it was moved in 2024, I think a lot of publishers and designers brought their A game to the CCG space, and they really did an incredible job with it. And I think people respond to that. So yeah, I'm not saying necessarily the things that sell the most, but I appreciate how much love has been put into categories when I see them like experience this kind of explosive growth in a short period of time. It's really cool. It means people are putting a lot of work and a lot of passion into it, and people are responding to it.
It's a very cool thing. And how many, like, in terms of turnout for the various events that you hold at the store, what are you seeing turnouts on, like, on a day-to-day basis for the various games?
Oh gosh, like game by game, or just like what's the game room like?
Yeah, you don't have to necessarily do every single game, but more like an idea of like what are you noticing that's the most popular that are drawing people in. Most of the time, I always hear it being Magic, but with your passion for D&D, I'm curious if it's maybe a little like more geared towards RPG players.
Yeah, I mean, role-playing games in general are probably around a quarter of our like event attendance, right? I can break it down that way.
Mm-hmm.
Miniatures are probably around, I think, 20%, 25%, probably pretty similar to RPGs. Board games are kind of tough to have like an event because there's like not tournaments and there's not a D&D thing, but we do like demos and we do a board game night, and that might be 15%. And the rest of it's CCGs, right? So what does that leave? Like, we sell something like 6 CCGs, and they account for maybe 38% of our gross event attendance, right? So it's a lot. CCGs are a lot. A lot of the players play CCGs when they come to the store. But yeah, I mean, D&D is something we're pretty proud of, right? I obviously like the game, and we have a real community built around it. And RPGs in general are also something we've done really, really well with. And I think it takes a lot of focus, and it takes somebody to kind of love that category up. I think if you just throw the books on the shelf, it doesn't work.
So when you look at where you are now with the store compared to from when you first started off, what are like some of the things that you would say you're most proud of, and then something on the flip side of that that's been the biggest challenge?
It's a really great question, and I think I'm going to answer it in a way that feels right, but I haven't really like analyzed it. I don't think, when I started off, the game trade was a lot smaller. So I've been doing this for almost 20 years now. And so owner-operator stores were the norm, right? Like you go into like the Warhammer store, and the sort of corporate model that they have of like 1 or 2 people running the entire store, right? That's sort of what they do. That was every game store that I went into, with very few exceptions, probably for a decade and a half. If you had 2 employees in there, that was a really busy place. So I think one of the things that I think I'm most proud of is the team that we've built over the years isn't just like really consistent right now, but they're consistent about also like when one of them leaves, they have some real ownership of the position. They try to find somebody within the existing team or within the applicant pool, or recommending a friend who's like really into it. And I think that kind of sense of like they care about the community and the store and the space that's obviously a labor of love, and it's really tough to build. And I'm really proud of that team and the work that they do. And at the same time, the thing that's been really hard for me over the years is to let go of the reins and let them do their jobs. So like right now, like the best and worst day is when I go into the store and I recognize at some point that I'm 100% superfluous or even in my team's way. Because I enjoy interacting with the customers, and obviously I like talking to people. But it's kind of like there's this like bittersweet satisfaction of like, boy, I don't need to be here, and I probably am like screwing up her job and his job simultaneously. And that feels really good that they're confident in their roles and doing things well. But like, man, I like being on the sales floor. Man, I like talking to people.
You know what it shows though, too? It shows the success that your store has achieved to where you don't have to necessarily do it all the time, even though, it was originally what you enjoy doing. The fact that you have a good team around you to be able to facilitate that, I'm sure that's got to be a rewarding feeling, like to almost like take a step back and be like, wow, like I don't actually have to do this, even though I want to.
Yeah.
Like I could just hand it off.
Yeah, absolutely. But like, I'll let you know when I accept that. It keeps happening, and I keep being proud of the team, and they keep being amazing, and I still keep having those moments where I'm like, Matt, you need to go home now. But yeah, I like the work, and I think that's one of the things that I think, like I've said before, I wouldn't still be doing this if I didn't like the people and I didn't like the work on some level. So I think that push-pull response is, I think, pretty natural. It's hard to accept that the thing that you were doing and you did love is not necessarily the place that you're needed in some cases. But, like I said, I do a lot of the marketing, a lot of the like weird corners, and I like weird corners. I like pivoting, right? So I think I'm in a good role and it fits well. But there are times where I get like a little nostalgic for like, oh man, I wish I could just stand here and talk to people about games. I really like talking to people about games.
You know what it is, though? I'm sure it's at some point, though, it's good for you and your wife to get to spend time together. You get some time to relax.
You are right. You are 100% right. Like the first 3 or 4 years, right, of like zero vacation, opening a business, moving across the country. Yeah, like you pay up front for this time, but it's really an important thing to like recognize that, like, yeah, at some point you have to give yourself the room to accept that, like, yeah, I need to have a little time to have a life, right? I think that's an interesting thing too. Like, I'm sure there are people who are going to watch this that are maybe like, what's this guy talking about? Time to have a life. I just started my game store. Or I'm interested in starting a game store. And like, I don't care about that. But like, the older I get, the more I'm like, yeah, that balance is so critical. And I try to encourage it in our team. And then I like forget to do it for myself. So I think trying to get into a place where you're like, yeah, I'm going to take my hands off the tiller and I'm going to go away for 3 days. Don't call me unless something's on fire or there's a break-in, right? Like, it's really hard to do that because you're doing a job that you love. And so it's tough to step away, but I think you have to kind of unplug and reset your mind at some point to be able to stay good at it and to stay passionate about it and stay loving it.
This episode of The Match Slip is sponsored by Crash City Con, Roanoke, Virginia's premier gaming and fan convention. It's tabletop gaming at its best. In addition to role-playing games, board games, there are vendors and so much more. Play with some of the top game masters in the area, enjoy a casual game in their open gaming area, or learn to play games you always wanted to play. You could check out more information at crashcitycon.com.
It's a great insight to have. Very good to have that, work-life balance, essentially. I'm sure, though, still, though. Yeah, and I'm sure even though you've been able to do some of that now because of all the work you put in ahead of time, I would imagine still being a store owner in general, whenever you're the head person at the top, I'm sure like you're always getting calls and stuff, I would imagine, or there's always something, whether good, bad, financial, whatever it might be, books, managing the books and stuff. I'm sure there's always something to do. Yeah,
I mean, there's it's what appealed to me in the first place, right? About small business ownership. And that's always something too. Like, I'm not totally sure whether your listeners are more in the like retail category or the wanting to open category or the looking for advice group. But like, I think for me, one of the things that I wish somebody had said is like, before you open a business, make sure that what you want to do is be running a business that's successful, right? Because I think you get into this realm of like, you really want to have a thing that when you succeed, you're not like, oh man, I really liked it the other way, or I really preferred it when I worked for somebody else. So, I think if I were going to give like prospective store owners advice, because I think like that's the person that I hear from the most that's kind of in this camp, like try to build for the life that you're hoping to have when your business is successful. Nobody opens a store and thinks it's going to make no money. Nobody opens a store and expects it to fail. That's not like the dream you're living. So like, if it succeeds, what does that do? What kind of life do you live? Are you going to be like playing card games every day and that's the goal? Okay, cool. Like, are you going to be taking vacations on a small tropical island? Maybe don't open a game store, right? Like, you got to kind of plan for what you want to do. And I think that's, it's advice that I wish I'd had earlier. And I think it took me a long time to kind of go like, oh, okay. So like, that's what this looks like. I can define what success looks like and I can kind of make space for myself instead of just working 90-hour weeks, as I mentioned earlier, which is certainly where a lot of us start when we open a business.
And because most people, like when they do start a business, they, have their full-time job and the business is on the side and they're essentially doing 2 jobs. And, I was thinking about your point about, recognizing in yourself, like, is this something I want to do? Or like when you mentioned, I really missed, when I was working for somebody. What do you think you have to come to like grips with as a store owner or somebody that's prospective in that field? What is it something you have to be able to, that give and take, or, what you may have right now as an employee of somebody, but when you make that switch, you might not have anymore. What do you think is missing there that people might not be aware of?
Yeah, I certainly think like one of the things that I encourage everyone to take a look at is like the hidden cost of the benefits that your employer may be giving you, right? That was a wake up call for me, right? When I went from being, employed with insurance and vacation time and paid sick leave and my like workers' comp policy covered me. Like there's a whole lot of changes that happen to those things in terms of both what you're paying and what you're getting. And that's just like a bookkeeping thing, but you should certainly be aware of it. And it's kind of nice when you sign the contract and you work for somebody for a year and that's all sort of a package deal. And obviously not everybody works for that company either. So that can be a motivating factor. You know, when I was an adjunct professor, there were no benefits, right? We didn't even have a union, right? So it was like you negotiated your contract individually in a lot of places. So yeah, I mean, not everyone's in that boat, but if you are lucky enough to be in the boat of having that benefit package, do the math on it before you strike out and open something else and make sure you're going to have something at least comparable, because you don't want to open a business and do all that work and then go backwards in quality of life. That's not what anyone should shoot for, no matter how much you love what you're selling, whether it's like fly fishing stuff or games. It doesn't really matter. That like the goal shouldn't be open a business, invest all your time and money, and then have a worse life afterwards. That's not what you want.
No, it's very, very wise advice. So one of my last questions for you related to, I know you brought up Gamma a little bit earlier. Are there any other conventions that you go to network? Do you do any for getting the name out about the store, or to like set up and vend ads to potentially attract other customers to? Do you partake in conventions often?
Yeah, so I'm not going to tell you how anybody else does it, because I know people who make a ton of money and their whole like business profit model is on a convention circuit. And I know people that won't touch them at all. And I tend to be somewhere in between on that, right? Like we do conventions, but there has to be sort of like a spin to it that makes sense for like how our marketing is working in some way. So like, to give you a weird one, right? We had a museum that had like 20 vendors in it that was like, hey, do you want to come sell like D&D dice? Because we have a thing going on that has, it was some kind of like math thing happening at that particular event. We were like, sure. Like I normally wouldn't vend, but it was educational. It worked with a community organization. It ticked all the other boxes we were talking about earlier. So I said, yeah, okay, I'll go to that. But as far as like going to Gen Con or something, we really don't do that kind of thing. What I do though, I go to some trade shows. I think Origins is super valuable. I've been to Gamma. I went to Gamma years ago when we were sort of opening one of our other locations in Milwaukee. And I go to distributor trade shows. I think those are super useful. They're a little bit smaller. You get to talk to publisher reps. You also get to see what that distributor's focus is. So if somebody's shifting from board games to toys, you can get that kind of boots on the ground perspective. The other thing that I try to do is go to like game adjacent things. And the best explanation or the best like example I can give is, and you'll find different things if you're looking for them, is a lot of the, say, like artists or designers who work in the game trade, as you just said earlier, moonlight, right? Like they have a day job. Maybe they work for video gaming. Maybe they work as like a teacher. So figure out what they're doing when they're not doing gaming and then go to that show. And there's a couple reasons that I do that. One is that we do a lot of outreach events. So I often learn about what's important to them and can then like loop that back into gaming. But also because you kind of get to see like what they're passionate about and what they're doing. And it kind of clues you into like, who are the people that when they bring that project to Magic or D&D or their publishing brand, it's going to be the one that knocks it out of the park, because this is where their passion is. So I don't do a lot of that. I might do 3 or 4 shows like that a year, but it gives me kind of some insight into the people behind the publishing elements when they're not in PR mode. And I kind of love to get to know them a little bit better. Because at the end of the day, like this really is a relationship business.
So my last question, Matt, for you was on what you see for the future of the store and what plans you might have. They could be grandiose, something that, you know, may take a very long time, or something that's, you know, you see coming up in the near future that you would like to share.
Yeah. So I won't lie to you. Like we spent a lot of time doing sort of like catch up. We moved into a larger space right before the pandemic. And so last year was the first year that we kind of felt like we had our feet under us. Everybody was kind of like functioning normally and everything was kind of operating the way we expected it to. So, you know, for me, I've really enjoyed being able to get back to some of these smaller scale kind of events, like getting into classrooms and getting involved in education and getting into kind of charity fundraiser type events where we can be a presence in the room and we can be a value add. And that's the stuff that kind of like excites me. And I would really love to expand that programming a lot more. We're starting to work on that this year. The other big thing from just like a logistics standpoint, we have all this CCG support. We do Magic singles and then kind of not a lot else. And our Magic singles, you know, a lot of them are online and it's pretty robust and we have kiosks and ways for you to interact with it in the store. And we don't necessarily do that as well for Lorcana, Pokemon, right? The roster goes on. So there's an inventory goal there that's kind of like nuts and bolts. And then there's sort of like an ephemeral, like, yeah, I really want to do more community events outside of the store now that we're allowed to like breathe air again. It was great to get back to that in 2024. And it's kind of like stoked the fire for me that like, yeah, that is the thing that I like doing. So hopefully those two things can be the focus in 2025 and 26. And then, we'll see where we are. Probably I'll say that now. And by June, something else will have come up.
Well, Matt, I appreciate you taking the time to come on the show today. Before we sign off here, is there anywhere you'd like to direct people that are listening to go to learn more about your store?
Yeah, absolutely. We're online at justgamesrochester.com, and I am happy to talk shop with anybody who wants to reach out or anyone who has any questions about some particular program that we're doing. Happy to share notes.
Awesome. And I'll be sure to include a link so everybody can check that out. And Matt, thank you again for coming on. It's been fun.
Absolutely. Thank you, Frank.